in the end, the idea is there's a time to pass away and there's a time to gather. Similar to what was described about harvesting and planting, but in this case, there's more of a permanent nature of the stones. There's something that is specifically obtained by casting stones and gathering stones. A time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing. This is the expression of love, of care. Whether it's a hug or, as some commentaries suggest, something more, regardless, there's a time to express affection. There's a time to refrain from expressing affection. Again, yes, there's wisdom involved in what emotions I choose to show at certain times, where it may be appropriate, where it may not be appropriate. But again, what Solomon's really emphasizing here is that this is part of the human experience. You're not going to spend all of your life showing affection for somebody or for many people. There's going to be times where you're not going to, for whatever reason. Verse 6, a time to gain and a time to lose. That particular aspect, some of these are not so much on you and I, and that's what kind of this boils down to, is that a lot of times this is just the nature of life. You and I don't have any control over it. Whether we gain something, we may not have control over that. The time to lose, generally we don't like losing anything, but yet that's what happens sometimes. And the wisdom that Solomon is wanting us to understand is that this is a part of life. To get upset or angry over one aspect, that's not really going to help you, because there is a time and a purpose for everything under the sun. And as a result, when things happen outside of our control, remember we mentioned this before, life is 10% what happens to us, 90% of how we respond, how we react. And that's a lot of what Solomon is including in this concept. A time to keep, a time to throw away. Yeah, there is wisdom in recognizing certain aspects of keeping things, throwing away things, moving on from something. But again, this has everything to do with the fact that throughout our mortal lives, we come into possession of things, and then we lose possession of those things, whether by choice or by life. That's simply the way life works. Nothing is permanent. Anything so far through verse 6?
Each one of these seems to be extremes of the other.
Yeah.
Like a positive versus a negative. And then everything in between, the time to tear versus the time to sow.
Yeah.
How do you determine which one's which?
Yeah.
That's just part of life.
That's part of life.
That we're living, that we experience different aspects, and to be prepared, we try to teach our children that life is not fair, so that they don't get devastated by bad times.
Right.
But then there's all the good times. We see that part of life.
Yeah. And if you are, I've heard many older people say that if you are extremely blessed, you will have just as much joyous times as you will have sorrowful times. That's what the ultimate hope is that it'll all balance out. And that hasn't been true for many brethren that I can think of. But in the end, there's going to be joys and sorrows. And that's just a part of what life offers. And it's not anyone's fault necessarily. It's not God's fault. Life is what happens to us when we're scheduling our lives and we're scheduling things for this week, for next week. Life is what happens in between. And we just have to, really part of what Solomon is describing is the wisdom to acknowledge that this is what life is. Life is comprised of events. It's comprised of decisions. And we have to use wisdom in our acknowledgement of these moments and of these occasions. Verse 7, as Doug mentioned, a time to tear and a time to sow. Whatever's being referenced here, tearing, of course, there's an acknowledgement of rending clothes with regard to mourning, but he's already acknowledged the idea of sorrow and mourning already. But there's the idea of things break and things can be repaired. Things are torn, things can be sewn back. But again, it's that idea of the lack of permanence, is that it's a constantly flowing ebb. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. Obviously, there's a great deal of wisdom of knowing when to speak up. Picking and choosing your battles is something as a parent that I have already started to learn. and we're going to have to learn even more, is that you have to choose your battles, right? You don't want to win the battle and lose the war. So that's certainly an aspect to life. Verse 8, a time to love and a time to hate. Again, this is not that Solomon is saying it's okay to hate, or it's okay to be cruel to someone. That's not what Solomon's observing here. He's observing man's life, moral, physical life. And that this is part of what we experience. There are going to be people who hate us, won't there? There's going to be people who love us for sometimes good reasons, sometimes for bad reasons. A time of war, a time of peace. Love and hate, these are emotions that individuals feel that are expressed towards other individuals or groups of individuals. War and peace, these are socio-political situations where love and hate gets expressed on a national level. So you have war and peace being representative of the emotions of an entire people, whereas loving and hating tends to look at more of a singular or smaller grouping of people. All right, anything through verse 8?
Hate could also be to love less.
Yeah, and certainly there's that aspect of that. There's a time to love completely and a time where maybe you're upset or angry at someone and you don't feel that love towards them. Generally speaking, these are contrasts in the extremes. But yeah, you could look at it that way. There's a time to love less than maybe what you did for whatever reason. Sure. Yeah. But, again, I want to emphasize that because there's been a lot of commentaries that go to verse 8 and say, well, obviously there's an exception to every rule. There's no exception to hate someone. No exception. In the scriptures, it's God. Is God making an exception for the worst and most vile of us in sending His Son to die? No. There's no exception. So there's always, for Christians, it's always a time to love. There's never a time to hate. That's not to say that we're not angry. That's not to say that sometimes we have to work on overcoming a grudge or resentment. Certainly that's a part of life. And I think at some point all of us will encounter that where somebody maybe does something terrible to us or to a family member or loved one, and it's hard for us. We have to really work on letting go of that anger towards that individual. So certainly that would be a part of that too. Anything else to verse 8? Verse 9. What profit has the worker from that in which he labors? I have seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, He has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. So Solomon, after observing these occasions of the mortal life, all occasions that man, and not necessarily us specifically, but that all people at some point will be exposed to, whether they personally experience them or they observe others experiencing them. Certainly, everything under that list, while you and I may not necessarily experience hate, I hope we don't, but we certainly have observed other people experience hate and the outcomes of that hatred. So verse 9, what profit has the worker? Now this is something that's been continued from chapter 2. Remember, Solomon has kind of been observing, especially in context to his work, and all the things that he has done, all the great building projects he's undergone, all the things that he has experienced. And the profit that he's observed is that when I die, it's just going to go to someone else. So what profit, especially given the context of this mortal experience, some by our own doing, some just by the nature of life, what profit has the worker from that in which he labors? And again, generally when Solomon refers to profit, he's referring to lasting profit. In the end, certainly the profit of, perhaps for those of us who get paid by the week, the profit that the worker has is that at the end of the week he gets paid. And he can buy food, and he can pay his bills. But Solomon's not observing the week to week. He's observing the full scale of life. What profit has the worker from that in which he labors? Life happens. whether you're profiting or not. And so this is what he's observed in verse 10. I have seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. What is the God-given task that the sons of men are to be occupied? Yeah. That's the ultimate conclusion, isn't it, in chapter 12? Fear God and keep His commandments. But as he observes this, the God-given task is to have the wisdom of recognizing the nature of life. And therefore, fear God and keep His commandments. This is the whole duty of man. This is what man really all he has. This is the ultimate profit that will last. There is no other profit. It doesn't matter how much money you have in your bank account. It doesn't matter how much retirement funds you have. It doesn't matter how many PhDs or master's degrees you've got. In the end, all those things are means to an end, sure. We get to take care of ourselves, our family, and so forth. We enjoy those works of our labor and the money, the means that we have to be able to supply for our families. But in the end, the only profit that lasts is fearing God and keeping His commandments. And that's what the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied really relates to that recognition, that wisdom. And it's really a constant reminder. I mean, how quickly can you and I, when we get out and we're going through our work day, our work week, we get so caught up in the minutiae of everything that takes place. And it's very easy for us to forget and lose perspective of the fact that this is all means to an end. That's all it is. This is not our life. Your life is not your career. Okay? Your life, that which God has given you, that is going to last, that is serving Him according to His will. The God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied is, remember, immoral. Remember that life happens, and make sure that we have the proper perspective as we live this life, no matter what life may throw at us, so that we can be pleasing to God. That is the God-given task. Verse 11, He has made everything beautiful in its time. Then he talks about eternity in their hearts. So verse 11, what does Solomon mean then? And we have hymns, and they're also based on songs of God making everything beautiful in its time. What does that mean? He has made everything beautiful in its time. Is this necessarily a link back to verses 1 through 8? Has God made hate beautiful? Is that what Solomon is necessarily speaking to? Is that all these things he listed in verses 1 through 8, that these things are beautiful to God? Then?
Everything has its purpose. Everything is perfect in the fact that it's set up and created by God and has a purpose.
Okay, so everything is set up and created by God, but then has God just left it alone? Is it just on its own now? God set it up and now it's going without any working of God behind the scenes? No?
I mean, there's a distinction here, verse 1, back when there was a time for the things under heaven, as we talk about upon this earth, our lives, whereas this is talking about God's time in His time. So
right.
That He operates, we say, through eternity, beyond eternity, whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
It's a different
scale, different perspective. You know, we talked Sunday about the big picture and appreciating our place in the big picture, coming from Ephesians, and how Paul acknowledged what his purpose was and his service to God, and that he wasn't the be-all and end-all. And this relates very well with what Solomon observed and came to the conclusion regarding man's time on this earth, when he says he has made everything beautiful in his time. And notice the latter part of verse 11, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. Does that mean God isn't working? It's just that man can't see what God is always doing. And this speaks to what? There's a term we use for this. God working behind the scenes. Providence. Yeah, providence. If verses 1 through 8 has everything to do with man and his perspective on what happens, man's experience, God isn't mentioned in that series of verses. Now he deals with the recognition, here's what God's doing behind the scenes. He's working. behind the scenes. He makes everything beautiful in its time. Which, every time I think about verse 11, especially in context to the God-given task, those individuals who have proper perspective, those individuals who understand what man's purpose really is here on earth, then they recognize that all things work together for good to those who love God, Romans 8. And it is in that context that Solomon says he's made everything beautiful in its time. God brings or allows things to take place for his will. Now, is God's will ever considered anything other than wise or beautiful? God's will is always wise and beautiful. That's not to say that man's choices coincide with being wise and beautiful. In fact, very often they're not. But God utilizes man's choices to bring about good for those who love God. Also, he has put eternity in our hearts, except that no one can find out. So what does he mean by verse 11? Also, he's put eternity in our hearts. What does that mean? God has put eternity in my heart, in your heart, in the hearts of man. But we're not able to see all that God does. But this is what he has done. He's put eternity in our hearts.
If there's more to this than this life.
Is there it's an accident that every civilization that has ever existed has always believed in something greater than himself? God or gods. There is a reason why man, after... It's funny because anytime you read any type of science fiction or predictions for the future, it seems like the association that scientists make with progress, enlightenment, and learning more, the less religious you should get. Okay, when they picture a society in 1,000 years, there will be any religion. And yet, the belief of something greater has existed for thousands of years. It has never stopped. Even now, in the population all over the world, only a small, tiny, not even 4% of people, everyone else believes in God, only a small percentage does, or a God, or a greater being. And the idea of putting eternity in man's heart is that there's something in our nature to look beyond. To look forward to something else. Because if in this life this is all there is, then what's the point of anything? I can only imagine how ultimately miserable an atheist or self-proclaimed atheist might be in thinking that we're all animals, we're just evolved from monkeys, this is all there is, so we might as well treat each other like animals. This is part of the reason why we have seen more and more an increase of people, and especially younger people, showing a complete lack of concern for human life. It's just, we're just animals. You put a dog down with cancer, you shoot a rat because he's in your house. Well, what's the difference? But the fact that we have souls, that there's something beyond this life. That is something that is ingrained in man. Certainly taught from Adam and Eve on, but it's ingrained in him. So when Solomon says in verse 11 that God has made everything beautiful in its time, he has put eternity in their hearts. That is part of God's work that he has done. No one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. There's so much that God is doing behind the scenes, far more than we can possibly imagine. But here's what he has done. He has put eternity in our hearts. To think beyond. The ability, conscience. This is what separates us from animals. Conscience. The ability to judge right and wrong. He has given us the ability to see beyond this life, to have wisdom beyond this life. And that is beautiful. And unfortunately, so many times people take advantage of it, take it for granted, or don't care about it at all. No one?
is part of what he's suggesting in the middle of verse 11. God has put an eternal existence in us also, unlike everything round about it, the rest of his creation.
Right.
We have an eternal component, a spirit that's going to live on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just talking about seeing the work that we trying to observe the work to be done under the sun, but for man, there's something beyond life under the sun.
And that just goes back to his re-emphasizing that we have the proper perspective in this life. To realize that all these things come and go. But there's one thing that will remain. And of course, that's our soul and the work of God. Anything else in verse 11?
Michael?
Yeah.
So, kind of related to this, it just went to my head right now. I'm 3 weeks into an 8-week course on just intro to human anatomy, just a general ed class, but what little I've learned already about our body, down to our cell structure, and how everything works together and everything has a purpose and how everything works. It's hard for me to understand how you can know that and not think that there's some intelligent design behind it.
Yeah.
How does that happen by accident?
Yeah.
Things that our bodies are capable of on a cellular level is much more.
You know, it's funny, there have been several examples, several books that have been written where scientists, for this reason or that reason, have set out to disprove God. And a lot of times through biology, through DNA, and sometimes you have these books being written by these individuals who have come to believe that there is a God by observing nature, by observing the complexity of life, and the aspect that obviously there's something behind all of this. This couldn't have just happened by chance, even in millions of years. I forget who it was that one of the scientists that I quoted in one of my lessons, that having the way the human body is created is the same as having a galaxy full of 747 parts, and then to have a massive solar storm come through, and all of a sudden you've got a fully formed, ready to go, ready to take off 747 created out of it. It's just not possible. This is simply not the way it works. So yeah, there's God's power and the things that He has done. He has left a testimony for us. He has left a witness, which is creation. Paul himself brought that up. But to recognize that this is what our purpose on earth is, not get bogged down in the stuff that takes place from day to day, but rather to recognize there's an eternity waiting for us, and we need to be ready for it. Anything else in verse 11? Verse 12. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. Remember earlier, he described what man's profit is in a negative sense, in that this is all vanity. Which is to say that when you put your trust and your perspective is based on this world, that's vain. But what he's considering in verses 12 and 13 is the perspective that man should have. The perspective that we are mortal, that there is something greater than us as God. He's created a soul in each one of us that will be eternal. And so when he says in verse 12, I know that nothing is better. So this is his perspective on this earth. This is Solomon on these individuals who have the wisdom to recognize how we should live this life, knowing that there's something greater coming. Nothing is better for us than to rejoice and to do good in their lives. To rejoice and do good in their lives. Often throughout the New Testament, we talk about the phrase good works, and sometimes that good is the type of good that benefits others. Sometimes that good is good regardless of if it benefits others, because it's beautiful in the sight of God. But good works are defined by God. But also the nature of good works are limited and restricted by God as well. We can't just decide what is good and what isn't. God has made that decision. He has decided what is good and what isn't, for individuals as well as for congregations. And so when he says it is nothing better for them to rejoice and to do good in their lives, because of the perspective that we should have To fear God and keep His commandments, is that doing good? Fearing God and keep His commandments, is that good? Absolutely. Why? Because God says it is, right? Now, the application of fearing God and keeping His commandments, does that mean I should treat others with respect? Is that good? Should I pray for others? Is that good? Yeah. But because God says it is, not because I've decided that it is, throughout the New Testament, we see the aspect of man having love for his fellow man. Christians are to have that love for his fellow man. That's respect certainly is going to be a part of that. God has said that's good. Praying for others. Paul mentions that in 1 Timothy chapter 2 about praying for all men. Okay, that this is good in the sight of the Lord. God says it's good, not because we decided it's good. And so when Solomon says, rejoice, rejoice. Why? Why should I rejoice? But Solomon has just finished chapter 1, chapter 2, saying it's all in vain. It's all pointless. Why should I rejoice if it's all pointless? Why should I rejoice? If nothing's going to last,
Being able to look beyond life under the sun.
all right. Being able to look beyond life under the sun, to recognize eternity is waiting, and then to give my life to that end. Will it matter what happens to me in the mortal life if I have that perspective? There are times where things are good, right? We've all experienced that. Things are going well. There's no drama. Perhaps there's nothing specific that's bothering our loved ones. Things are good. It's easy to rejoice when things are good. But what about when things are difficult? When there's health issues, when there's financial issues, when there's problems and drama, it's a little bit harder, right? But for the Christian who has the perspective that all of this, I do what I can, I do what I have control over. But in the end, what does the Christian understand? This too shall pass. This too shall pass. And as a result, our mind is on heaven. Our mind is on the fact that there is an eternity waiting. That's how we're able to rejoice. We talked before about joy and happiness, how that happiness is an emotion. It's something we feel. Sometimes it's based on events that make us happy. Sometimes it's not based on anything else. We just happen to feel happy. But emotion comes and goes. Joy, however, is the recognition that we are blessed. And no matter what physical blessings we can chalk up, and even in the worst of times, can we always find something to thank God for in our physical lives? Always. Always. However, no matter, let's say everything falls apart in our physical lives, is there still one aspect in which we as Christians can rejoice? What's that? Jesus, salvation, eternity. Right? Are we still blessed? Absolutely. So we are to rejoice and do good in our lives, and that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. Solomon just finished saying that what a man gains in the flesh is vanity. So why does he make this statement? Every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of his labor. It is the gift of God. But I thought you just said it's all vanity, Solomon. What makes the difference? What is the differentiation that Solomon has made between the two from chapter 1 and 2 to now? What's the difference? Is the difference in the food and the things we enjoy? Is the difference in the individual and his perspective? That's the difference. You have an individual who doesn't have the wisdom to see beyond this life, who puts all of their hope and all of their joy, that means everything they have, and what they can gain, versus the Christian, the individual who seeks to serve God, who understands this life is passing, none of this is going to last. And yet, 1 Timothy chapter 6, Paul tells Timothy to remind the saints that God has given us richly all things to enjoy. Do good. Work with your hands. Labor. Do the things you're supposed to be doing. Fulfill your responsibilities. Take care of your family. And enjoy what you gain from it, but understand the nature of it. You may have it today, but is there any guarantee you're going to have it tomorrow? So eat and drink and enjoy the good of your labor. As you work and as you toil under the sun, it is the gift of God, as long as you keep it in its perspective, that God has blessed you with it. He has given it to you for today. That's what contentment in the New Testament, that's how it's defined. It is God has made me sufficient for today. That's what contentment is. Not that we're not making plans for the future, but we're not worrying about the future. God has made it where I can be sustained with food today, that I have clothes on my back today, that I have shelter, roof over my head today. I am sufficient today. That's what contentment is. And the entire difference is man's perspective on it. Whether or not he's acknowledging that all this life is going to pass, none of it's going to last, or not. And you through verse 13. Yes, ma'am.
God cares for even sparrows.
That's right. That's right. God, and not a single bird falls from the air without God knowing. Right? And as a result, is God aware of everything that we go through in this life? Every single thing. Is God aware of every emotion we feel? Absolutely. That's part of the reason why Solomon mentioned there's a time and purpose for everything that would happen. And he observed these moments, some our choices, some we just experience out of life. That's part of what we appreciate. That God has given us something. And you know what's something that occurred to me as well? It doesn't mention these extremes, right? You read through this, and you think about all the occasions under which any one of these verses might fit. And the extreme nature of how quickly life can turn. Right? 1 minute you're joyous, and the very next hour you may be sorrowful, and vice versa. But what's interesting about this is, what's the one thing that always remains constant? Life doesn't, does it? Life doesn't remain constant. Life is constantly changing. But what's the one thing that remains constant?
Yeah.
Jehovah changeth not. Malachi chapter 3. Jehovah changeth not. Jesus Christ, Hebrews chapter 13, is the same yesterday, today, and forever. While life is constantly changing, if you put your hopes and your wisdom, your perspective all on this life, you are going to be a wreck. Emotionally, mentally, physically, because you're riding that roller coaster all the time. But as a Christian, that's not to say we're immune to the effects of life. Certainly not. But we fall back. When we recognize we have no control, and that moment when we're weakest, what did Paul observe in 2 Corinthians chapter 12? When I am weakest, what? Then I am strongest. That's when I rely on God the most, is when I am at my weakest point. For the Christian, for the person serving God, this is what he falls back on. The individual who is only focused on this life, what does he fall back on? What does he fall back on? Nothing. That's why when you have crashes in the stock market, there's a wave of suicides. Because they have nothing to fall back on. It's sad. It really is. And yet this is what Solomon observed. He acknowledged this is what the nature of man is. Anything else in verse 13? Alright, we only have about a minute before bell rings. Start verse 14. I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it, nothing taken from it. God does it, that men should fear before him. Alright, we will pick up with verse 14 next Wednesday night. Thank everybody for the thoughts and comments.